Hi, welcome to the Sew Along 2018, where we're making a nice New Zealand flavoured quilt using some very delicious fabrics by Nutex. We've been busy making blocks for several weeks now, well, quite a few weeks. We're up to block 21. How amazing is that? This time is just flying past. So this time we're going to be doing some applique. We've got one of the New Zealand birds featured here. This is a tūī, well, my version of a tūī anyway. The tūī are wonderful birds. They make some very interesting noises. They have a little white tuft at their throat, possibly slightly exaggerated in my little version, and they like to hang upside down and feed from the flowers, and this time of year they're just out there making a whole lot of noise and having a wonderful time drinking too much nectar, I think. So the pattern is available on my website on GourmetQuilter.com to purchase and download. For those of you who already have the pattern, you'll know how it works. Because we're making two of every block, we've got the applique patterns reversed so that you can just trace them to make both the blocks with a diagram of how they're going to end up for each one. So I think we'll just get on. So I've made the one block and I've just started on the second block. There are quite a lot of little fiddly pieces, so I just stopped before I got any further. The pieces are numbered in the pattern so you can see what order to pop them down in. So I've done piece 1, 2, 3 and 4. I'm ready to put on piece 5. Now these funny little bits here are kind of like some little fluffy knickers on the birds. They have these nice little fluffy bits just above the main part of their leg there where it attaches to their body. So they go, I've just found that it was easier to put them on one at a time, even though they're just little tiny things. It's often a good idea if you're trying to depict something to make it as near to realistic as possible, even though obviously it's not especially realistic. So I'm going to pop that on there and I can iron that in place, and then we're ready to stitch that. We are going to pop the other pieces on. Now I personally have preferred to do them one piece at a time because of the positioning, because of making sure all the little stitching's done, and by doing that stitching I don't have to start tying off ends or anything like that. We're then going to come back and start laying some of the other pieces, but I think I'll just go away, and we only need to do round the curve bit. We don't need to do across the top of that, so I'm just going to go to the machine and just do some applique. So I've got my blanket stitch all set up. I've reduced the stitch just a little bit for my machine so that it's just on a length of 2 and a width of, a width of 2 and a length of 2.3. Machines vary a little bit, but that seemed like a pretty good size, so a little bit smaller than the machine standard. And so I'm just going to go, you know how to do all this, but I'll just do this little tiny bit because it's just a little bit tight. So just remember, stopping often with the needle off the applique, just off, and just turn it frequently rather than wrenching the fabric. This way the stitches go in nice and straight from the edge, which gives you a nicer edge. And that's all that little piece took. So I've already done the feet, as you can see. They were also a little bit fiddly, but just take them slowly so that everything just sits nicely. So the feet we should talk about, we put the little back one on first. They should look as if they're sitting over this supposed branch just here. I think that's looking pretty good. So now we need to pop the next piece on. Now I am going to have to turn it around to face me because I can't do upside down tūīs, it seems. So the next pieces to put on numerically are going to be the beak and the little throat. I must find out what that little thing's called. However, to position them, we're going to need to sit our other pieces on as well. So I'm going to, my fusible that I'm using is steam seam, and it's a little bit sticky all by itself, so, which is quite convenient at a time like this because I can sit it in place and then move it around till I'm happy with it. So I'm going to position these other couple of pieces, even though we're not ready to stitch them just yet, so that I can get my, oops, that's the wrong one, that wouldn't help me at all, so that I can get my beak and the little throat fluff sorted out into the right place. Now just keep an eye where the tail might be going to go, because you've got a seam here. Don't have it coming right out into your seam allowance, but it is a fairly tight fit just inside. If you look at the diagram you can see that. So I think That's actually looking pretty good like that. You can't see a lot of the white throat thing, but you will when you've stitched around it. And then we're going to come back after we've stitched those pieces and put this piece over the top, so it covers up some of the little bits and pieces. Now I'm just going to pop that throat thing in just a little bit more. That was a bit big. So I'm going to now remove the actual body piece and iron these. So the beak, make sure the beak and the little throat fluff haven't moved, and the tail sitting just inside where the seam allowance will be. And now I'm ready to go and stitch, so I can go and stitch around the beak. I don't need to stitch on this little inside piece. Same thing on the little throat piece. Don't need to stitch on that straight piece. And the tail, I'm going to go all the way around. Again, don't need to stitch this piece because they're going to be covered up by these other pieces that are still to come. So I'll go ahead and do some of that. I'm going to start with the beak. A little bit fiddly, but if you just take this sort of applique, just take it very slowly. Don't try and rush it, and then you'll find that it really isn't so bad. So always stop with the needle just off the applique on the background fabric. Fiddly on the point there, just as I said, stitch by stitch, and you'll find it'll be fine. So I've done the rest of the stitching. Like you saw me do the beak, I've done around the little throat thing, I've gone around the tail, and now I'm going to position this piece on here. So this should sit quite nicely because we tried it out before. We want to get down, cover the little top edge of those little fluffy knickers. We don't want to be caught short there. This should all line up here with the beak. The birds have quite a large beak that sort of just comes out a bit like that. That's sitting okay. We can double check that when we pop this piece on, everything is going to look good. And to me, that's looking pretty good. So I can just iron this piece on now. And then I can go back and stitch that on. So when I'm stitching that one, because this one sits over the top, we don't need to stitch every aspect. So because this is covering up the back of the bird here, we can really just start here and come all the way around and just leave a gap there that we don't need to stitch. You can stitch it if you want to, but it's not necessary to stitch all the way underneath there. So another, and then of course you don't have to tie all the ends off because we're going to be covering them up again. So back to the sewing machine, and I'll show you again before I put the next piece on. So I've just finished the stitching. I've left this back unstitched, just pressing it. I like to press everything as I go. Everything just sits that little bit nicer, I think. So I'll turn it around this way again. And now I'm just going to position this. So this kind of is just his top wing. And some things in the pattern, there's some little details and things that I put in there which you can put on afterwards, and I'll show you what I've done. You can stitch them if you'd like to. You don't, even though they won't show a lot, if you think about a bird, we can't really see all the details, but they are there. So sometimes it's worth putting them there anyway. So I'm just going to stitch that on there now. It doesn't come right the way around his neck or anything. It's just like a top neck and wing part. And I'll go away and I'll stitch that, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how I've done any markings. So just doing the very last bit along his neck here, joining up with where I started. And this little guy is done. So again, another quick press. It's looking pretty cute. And then I could stitch the markings, as I've mentioned, that are on there, or you could not put them on at all. But I often like to use one of the Pigma pens. These are a permanent fabric marking pen. And I'm just going to even though they don't show a lot, it's just that they show a little bit. So I'm just going to pop some little markings just like on the pattern piece that shows, and as I said, even though they don't really show much, they are there. And it's surprising how much difference it does actually make. And he has a little eye up here, or actually quite a big eye. He's keen to see where he's going. On the wing there's a little bit of and some little curly bits here. And on his throat thing, a little twirl. As I said, you might want to sew these, you might want to not even put them on. But I think it's nice to just have a little bit of something, even if it's not hugely obvious. So that's my second Tūī. Here they are, not really on speaking terms today it seems. As I said, they're a cheeky bird, they're a noisy bird, but they're kind of a nice bird to have around in the garden. And this time of year, they're everywhere. So that's it for block 21. We'll see you again next time for block 22, getting close to the end now.